Next person there is Samuel Bond. And he's kind of a favorite of mine because he was kind of an historian in Mondovi. I kind of like to think of Samuel Bond as kind of the Forrest Gump of early Mondovi. Because he took part in a lot of the events that took place in the early years and he knew everybody. He came to Mondovi in 1864 as a 15-year-old along with his mother. His father had died, and so his mother brought the family out here, and they came in 1864 and settled out in the town of Naples. And in the mid-1920s, Samuel Bond wrote a series of articles in the Mondovi Herald over like about a 2 or 3 year period about his recollections of Mondovi in those early years, and it really gives you a really good picture of what Mondovi was like in that time period. He really lays out where people lived in that time period and what the land was like and what the activities were like. You really get a good picture, and it would be interesting if someone had time to take what he wrote, because he'll say so, because he writes it in the context of the 1920s, so he'll talk about, well, so-and-so lived where this person lives now. Well, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. So it'd be interesting sometime if someone would take what he wrote, see who was there in the 1920s and see what's there now, and you could really get a really clear picture of how it was laid out in the 1860s and 1870s. But he was kind of basically the go-to guy for Mondovi history in the 1920s. Like I said, he had known most of the people and had taken part in most of the events of the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was kind of like sort of the old, remember Roy Lee's old-timer reports? He was kind of the old-timer of his day, and in a lot of ways, Roy Lee kind of took off where he ended. Because Sam kind of knew these people in their younger days. Roy Lee kind of knew a lot of the same people as old men, or as their children. So if you kind of put those two together, you get a pretty good idea of the first maybe 100 years or so of Mondovi history. And it'd be interesting to actually take Sam's columns and put those in a book like they've done with Roy Lee's. It wouldn't be quite as big, but it'd be an interesting thing the project for the Historic Society, I think, to call out. House at Rockwell has printed some of those in his book, but I don't think he printed all of them. I think he had a 2 or 3 year period where he wrote them, but I think there were some other scattered ones. So I think that's some project to think about that we should be doing. Shortly after arriving in the area, Samuel Bond went to work for Harvey Farrington, and he worked for. And it is really through Sam's recollections that you can really learn a lot about Harvey Farrington. He worked for Farrington for 18 years, on all Harvey Farrington's different ventures. One of the businesses that Harvey Farrington had was to sell supplies to the lumber camps up north, and to the lumber mills in Eau Claire. And one of Samuel's jobs was he delivered those supplies. And so in his columns he describes some of those journeys that he took. It was a 10-day round trip to go up there and come back again. Just to go to Eau Claire, it was a 9-hour stretch just to get from here to Eau Claire back then, and there was no Highway 37 to hop onto. There wasn't even a trail there. They had to actually go up through Rock Falls area and cut over. So you can imagine going up over the hills and with the wagons full of stuff, and the wagons would dump out sometimes, and they'd have an awful time. But he'd go up there, and then they'd come back to Eau Claire, and they'd take supplies down here, mostly for stuff that Harvey could resell down here, like lumber and things. And one of those trips that he brought back, remember the Forrest Gump kind of thing, he brought back the lumber that built the First Methodist Church downtown on one of his loads. So you really don't think about Mondovi as being part of that lumbering era, but we did play a role. One of Harvey's ventures, when you talk about that, it's about Harvey, but I didn't realize, is that Harvey Farrington owned the mill in Gilmanton, and pretty much built that and developed that, and that's where a lot of the feed and things they took up north came from. And that's where his headquarters were, and that's where Sam worked for him for a while, is down in Gilmanton. So you also get a picture of early Gilmanton through Sam's writings. My favorite story about Samuel Bond actually is something that took place in the 1920s, and it has to do with Central Lutheran. Back in 1927, the Central Lutheran, the Norwegian Lutherans at that time, were going to remodel their building, and got to be an argument around town when that building was built. Some thought it was newer, some thought it was older, so they went to Sam. Forrest Gump, he was there. He helped lift the cornerstone in place. So he said, "I'll show you where it is." So they took it, sure enough, opened the cornerstone, and there it was all written down, just as he had recalled. So we actually reprinted that in our bulletin when we observed that anniversary at church. Sam Brown was married. Samuel Bond was married to May Brown, who was a daughter of one of the early settlers who we'll be talking about. Her father was Harvey Brown, and we'll be talking about him a little bit here. And they had 3 children, Mildred, Max, Milton, and Harvey. And Max Bond I've heard of, I think. I don't know, have you, Ed?
He lived in Eau Claire.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Is that Sam's son?
Yeah. And then Mildred married a Tanner, R.J. Tanner. I don't know if that was Roy Tanner. Didn't he have a first wife?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that would have been Sam's daughter. And I forgot. I talked a little bit to Almeda Latchow. She was filling me in on some of this stuff, and I think she said that. But I was going to check on that, and I didn't really get a chance to really confirm all that. Sam's brother Jacob owned the first meat market in town. And also, Samuel was apparently a great gardener. He had a lot of gardens around his house, and he also tended gardens for people's houses around town. And he was really good at that too. Kind of self-educated. He really didn't get a lot of education, but he self-educated himself. And you can tell by his writing in the 1920s. So he's a kind of important figure, I think, in Mondovi history, just because of what he wrote in the 1920s. He left a record.